Welcome to Soul Connections, a podcast about enchanting relationships with the human, more than human, and divine. I'm Emily, an astrologer, mystic, and herbalist.
I'm Aryn, an astrologer, writer, and creator.
And I'm Dani, a musician, astro minister, and organizer. We're your hosts. Join us for illuminating conversations with radiant guests and Astro Church sermons that weave astrology, mythology, and tarot.
Journey with us as we make meaning out of mystery through archetypes, patterns, and storytelling.
Will there be things still in the dark times? Yes, there will still be singing. Yes, there will still be singing. Yes, there will still be singing about the dark times.
Welcome to another episode of Soul Connections. Today is July 17th. We are nearing the end of Cancer season, and we have another Astro Church sermon for you today. And first, we will introduce ourselves as we always do. I'm Emily. I use she, her pronouns, and I have a Taurus sun, Gemini moon, and Leo rising.
I'm Aryn. I use they, them pronouns, and I have a Capricorn sun and rising with a Taurus moon.
And I'm Dani. I use she with a capital S and they pronouns. And my sun is in Aries, exalted sun. My moon is in Pisces, and my rising is in Libra. Welcome to another Astro Church sermon. We place Astro Church at the end of the season to reflect on our lived experiences rather than try to predict them. Astro Church is about finding meaning in what we've been through, connecting deeply to the stories that we're living in, and hopefully discovering some magic and hope for the future.
In this episode, we will be talking about Cancer. We have a really cool story archetype for you from a movie called Over the Moon. Our herbal connection is Mugwort, and we're going to be talking about the Four of Pentacles tarot card as well. Just some general themes that we're going to be touching on in this episode is lineage, belonging, nourishment of the whole self, not just our bodies, but our emotions, our spirits, and also how we take care of each other.
So to get us started today, we're going to do our universal shoutouts, which is a segment in Astro Church where we are holding space in our hearts and in our spirits for people, for collective struggles, for individual struggles, and also for the joys, for what uplifts us, for what brings us hope, and for the experiences that are worth celebrating. And we like to hold these experiences in our hearts and send a little love and amplification that way. So to begin with universal shoutouts, we like to center and ground so we can be present with everything that we're uplifting today. So I invite listeners and my co-host to feel settled in your seat or feel your feet firmly planted on the earth beneath you, and to take a deep breath in through your nose and exhale out through your mouth. And so I want to open it up and see who and what we are holding space for today.
I can go first. In this Cancer season, the big beautiful bill was passed, and there's a lot of people who are going to be impacted by that. And there's also a lot of people that are inventing and organizing ways to catch people who are going to be affected by that. So I really want to uplift the mutual aid efforts and all of the ways that we figure out to take care of each other and ourselves that don't involve dependence on this system that is like a death cult, you know? So I guess that's what my universal shout out is to.
Universal
It's,
shout out.
and if you are someone who has information about one of these efforts or is someone who is working on something that is trying to help people who are going to be affected by some of this stuff, like please let us know. There's lots of ways to get in contact with us, and I would love to help uplift that just as a person, but also as a group of people. So yeah.
Absolutely. I can go next. I have a personal universal shout out this month. My sister-in-law had her very first baby at the beginning of Cancer season. And so I am an auntie for the first time, and my sister-in-law is a mother for the first time. And this is the first baby of the next generation in our families, which is so exciting. And I absolutely adore this baby. And I feel just so much love and very like a Cancerian protection of my sister-in-law as she is in this very vulnerable, transformative journey of becoming a mother for the first time. And I just have a lot of hope for these next generations. Jupiter is in Cancer right now, and my nephew was born the day before the Jupiter Cazimi. So he has that signature in his chart, and I'm so excited to see how that unfurls throughout his life. But with Jupiter in Cancer, there are like, I have never known so many pregnant people in my life, and it feels like there are a lot of babies being born with this Jupiter in Cancer. And I'm just thinking how this like small sect of this generation of the Pluto and Aquarius generation with the Jupiter and Cancer this next year, how nourishing and generous these beings will be for the collective. So it brings me a lot of hope, and it really roots me into there is so much to live for, there is so much to fight for, and that celebrating new life is always worth celebrating. So universal shout out to my sister-in-law and her baby.
It really goes to show that we can't afford to not have hope when we're around children. That's always something I felt as a teacher. So thank you for that. I feel like my universal shout out, I've been thinking so much about the land, the earth. And even though we are experiencing so many consequences from climate catastrophe and in some ways climate negligence, climate pain. I'm not thinking of the right word, but like I'm thinking a lot about even though through all of that, land still provides for us, like we can still grow food. And I'm just amazed by that sort of feeling of like that the earth gives to us so much, even within contexts of like destruction. And so I feel like that kind of fits into what both of you are saying of like, we got to fight for this and like it's worth that energy. So shout out to the earth.
Always a universal shout out to the earth.
One more. So it's actually from my friend Maya Goldblum or Queen Bonobo. She wanted to do a universal shout out to our Milwaukee community because she came to our event in Cancer season. She's a Cancer rising and a Sag Sun Gemini moon. So she's got like this Sag Gemini like manifestor energy, like big vision, big visionary of the Sag, but also like a local community sense to her as well. So she's an organizer, she organizes shows and stuff like that. And she just was really, her and her partner were just so appreciative and blown away by how many awesome people there are in Milwaukee. And like, that's like what this podcast is a lot based on is, not just people in Milwaukee, but people just in our circle in general, like, but also like Milwaukee is a place that is rooted in for sure, especially between the three of us. And she was just like, she's like considering coming back and living here for a short stint in the summer next year, you know, just because like we just really do have such beautiful norms and like connection to one another. And we were talking about this right before we started the podcast about like River West specifically and how being in community with your neighbors and like nourishing each other and taking care of each other. So she wanted to say that. And also I wanted to shout out her in that by saying she's releasing a song, on August 1st called Waiting Tables. And it's about how she wants to be able to live her life without having to do something like wait tables for the rest of her life and be able to explore her art and creativity and what she really has to offer the community, which is that organizing sense, that capacity to bring people together and bring delight and joy and connection through music. So shout out to Maya, and also from Maya to the Milwaukee community.
Thank you, Maya. That was such an amazing show to be a part of. So excited to have more opportunities and would love for her to come back and perform in Milwaukee. So thank you, everyone. I just feel so giddy from that universal shout out, right? Like it's important that we honor the struggles, and it's also important that we celebrate what brings us all together and what makes life so worth living. So if you want to hold all of those individual, collective, communal struggles, joys, celebrations in our hearts, and just give some loving energy and amplification so we can uplift all of those. And we'll take a deep breath in through our noses. And on our exhale, we'll send the love to all of the universal shout outs named today. It is the Air and Water Show, unfortunately, in Milwaukee this weekend. And so I just had a jet plane fly over my house. So I'm going to say a big thumbs down to the Air and Water Show. And there is a protest of that this weekend. Yeah, not a fan
No
of that.
universal shout outs. It's closed. Universal shout outs against the Air and Water Show. It actually is awful. It's actually like so awful because of engine noises give me that dysphonia thing where it's like you get so rageful, like really big engine noises. And like, I can't even imagine for the dogs. Like, I'm sorry. I know it's not just the dogs, lots of people. I mean, people with PTSD, like it's really, really intense. So yeah, it's awful. Like we laugh about how much we hate it, but it's like seriously awful. So just want to
And
say
it's
that.
really bad for the environment, all of the jet fuel that they burn. Like none of the local like birds and insects and beings around here are enjoying this. Like it is straight military propaganda, and it is everything we are against. So we might hear more of those sounds during our podcast today. And yeah, it'll weave in with some of our themes for sure.
Yeah.
Or not our themes, but some of our discussion points today of what's happening in the world. Yeah, all right. Well, universal shout outs. Dani, can I turn it to you for our story connection for today?
Yes. Our story connection for today is from a movie, Over the Moon. It's a musical animated movie on Netflix. And we are there's an opening scene towards the beginning of the movie, where the characters of Mama and Baba and the main character Fei, who is a young person, and they are all singing a song together along with the workers that they have in their shop where they make moon cakes. So I'm going to read the lyrics to that song as a poem. Stuff, roll, press, smack. Stuff, roll, press, smack. Sift the flour, let the eggs crack. Knead the dough on every hour, and then we start it all again. Stuff, roll, press, smack. Stuff, roll, press, smack. Form the dough around the filling. Brush with egg and please no spilling. What a lovely gift they are. Mama turns to Fei, and there's tradition in these moon cakes. and we make everyone with care. Then we bake them full of fondness, sweetness, lofting through the air. And there's magic in these mooncakes. You can feel it all around. Mooncakes where the magic is found. Customers start to enter the shop. All the while, Mama, Baba, Feifei, and the workers keep singing. Stuff, roll, press, smack. Stuff, roll, press, smack. Sift the flour, let the eggs crack. Knead the dough on every hour, and then we start it all again. Stuff, roll, press, smack. Stuff, roll, press, smack. Form the dough around the filling, brush with egg, and please, no spilling. What a lovely gift they are. A customer asks, we need 5 more, or maybe 12, because I've got the cousins coming. Her husband replies, and you know just how they are. Both of them singing together. They love these cakes, so I think you better give me 20 more. Mama says, each one holds a message from the moon above. Cherish life and everything you love. Magic in these mooncakes. Baba agrees. Magic in these mooncakes. Mama says, hidden in these mooncakes for you. As the seasons change, Mama starts to get sick. She sings to her family to remind them, magic in these mooncakes for you. How the leaves are changing. Soon the festival begins. Such a special feeling. Magic in these mooncakes. Hidden in these mooncakes for you. Later, Feifei holds a picture of her mother who has passed. And there are memories in these mooncakes. All these memories shared with you. All the stories that you told me, Mother, make me think of you. Magic in these memories, forever I hold true. Mooncakes and memories of you.
Thank you for that reading, Dani. We're going to talk more about that story connection and how it leads into the other themes. But I want to go ahead and talk about our tarot connection, which Emily is already on sharing on the screen. So if you are not watching the video, we are going to be talking about the Four of Pentacles. Later, Emily will also be talking about Mugwort. So you can see on the screen, we have 2 tarot cards, one from the Herb Crafters tarot deck, and then one from the traditional Rider-Waite-Smith. So I'm going to introduce it and invite Dani or Emily if anything you would like to add and jump into this card. Definitely feel free. But immediately, Four of Pentacles depicts a person. They're sitting on some sort of chair, and usually in the background, there's like a city depicted, and they have 4 pentacles. So 2 are underneath their feet, 1 is on their head, and 1 they're like sort of holding, and almost holding like a medallion, like a big circle. And so typically, because this is a 4 card, and this is also the pentacles, which relates to the earth and our material reality, resources comes up for this card, holding tight to our resources. And that could mean stability. When we hold close to our resources, that means we're stable, we are secure. This, I think, does tie into Cancer as well as Capricorn. I actually found out that this card is associated with Sun and Capricorn specifically. And, I think both Capricorn and Cancer, they're concerned with security. They might go about it in different ways, but they're thinking about holding that, keeping that, making sure that that is something that feels consistent or stable. Dani had written in our notes about how Cancer has an instinct to protect, especially things that are precious. And so while the pentacles could mean our literal resources, tarot doesn't have to be like so literal sometimes. Like sometimes it could also mean holding tight to like loved ones or relationships or even like memories that we like hold and cherish. And on the other hand, a challenge with this card is that sometimes when we hold things too tightly, it almost seems like we do this self-fulfilling prophecy of like holding things too tightly, and then like inevitably we can't hold on to everything. Like things move and shift and change. And so there could be a feeling of this card of like almost being like, I'm not going to acknowledge vulnerability or instability because I'm so set on like holding dear to what I have. And sometimes when we hold really, really tight to things, the experience of letting go or shifting and changing can be really challenging. Before this, we were talking about how it kind of reminded us of the way that wealth is understood in American culture and society. We have a lot of like billionaires who are holding, who are greedy, who are like keeping resources for themselves. And then on the flip side, we have people who don't have resources or money feeling that same sort of scarcity of like, I have this, I need to keep it, protect it, not share it with anyone. So that's sort of like a more challenge with this card. But either of you like to add on?
Yeah, I think that part is really interesting, especially in how it connects to Cancer, because on the one hand, Cancer's got the hard outer shell and the soft underbelly. And so the hard outer shell is creates a container. It's like a secure container. And part of deepening relationships is creating that secure home environment. And Cancer is a water sign, so it does it in an emotional way. It creates that by deepening our connections and our bonds, and then it's trying to keep that protected. But on the flip side of that, we're talking about how Cancer is a cardinal sign, so it's like it has an impulse to act. And so when it feels instability or insecurity or vulnerability, that soft underbelly, that's where it needs that protection. That's where it's going to go into its little hermit crab hole. You know what I'm saying? Because that's how, to me, it is associated with the Cancer-Capricorn axis too, you know, especially pulling it for this Cancer season archetypally, like the Four of Pentacles is a Capricorn card, but it can relate to Cancer in the way of like becoming like overprotection or like possessiveness, you know, how possessiveness can show up in like an emotional way. And that can create like sharpness or crabbiness or greediness, you know, as we were talking about wealth, like it can create like a greediness out of like fear. It's like a fear, you know, you were saying scarcity, like it's a fear, you know, around what is precious being taken from you, you know? So I just think that's really relevant for Cancer season. And also because the United States is technically a Cancer sun. And we'll talk about that a little more later. Like there's a marking of that shadow side of it in this as well.
I love that. It makes me think too that you can still feel security and you could still hold on to your resources, but you can loosen up a little bit, even like the grip of this character, like they're very like holding on to this. What would it mean to just put your hands down and keep it in your lap? Like you could still have maintain that security and safety, but not go too far in the other side of like where it's rigid. Emily, would you like to share more about our herbal connection?
I would love to. Yes. So our herbal connection for Cancer season is mugwort, one of my most beloved and cherished plants, and such a beloved plant of so many magical people, just a beloved plant ally of witches and herbalists and folk magic practitioners, and many of our ancestors, of those of us of European descent. This is a plant that is native to Europe, and it is also native to Asia and North Africa and Alaska, and it has been naturalized now in North America. And today, it is definitely considered a weed by many. But I get so giddy every time I see mugwort growing in the wild. So let's talk a little bit about why is this plant so magical? What is the connection to Cancer, but specifically the moon? And the moon is the planet or the luminary that rules the sign of Cancer. And mugwort has such strong affinity with our beautiful nighttime luminary, the moon. And mugwort also has connection with the major arcana card, the high priestess. And so the scientific name, or the binomial as it's called, of mugwort is Artemisia vulgaris. And Artemisia, there's a whole like family of plants in the Artemisia family. Another sibling of mugwort would be wormwood. So if you've ever had a shot of malort, I'm sorry, but that it tastes really bad in my opinion. As someone who lived in Chicago for 6 years, but wormwood, malort is fermented wormwood, but that is like a sister plant to mugwort. So mugwort is very bitter, but that name Artemisia, what does that make you think of? That is a direct connection to the Greek goddess Artemis. And Artemis is the sister of Apollo, the sun god. And so Artemis is the goddess of the hunt and the goddess of the moon. And I think of how wild and free the goddess Artemis is, and mugwort is a prolific plant in the wild. Very rarely is this a cultivated plant. I have intentionally cultivated mugwort in my garden because I love her, and I wanted her to grow in my garden, but she grows prolifically and wildly. And her connection to the moon is because energetically, spiritually, her impact, all plants have energetic and spiritual relationships with us, impacts on us. And I really love to work with plants from like an energetic spiritual lens. There are certainly physical medicine of plants as well, and mugwort is one of those plants that I will just say directly you need to work with like a clinical herbalist or a trained herbalist who fully understands and can inform you about the impacts of mugwort on the body, as mugwort can definitely, there are just certain types of people, or if you're on specific medications, or if you're pregnant, or trying to become pregnant, there's just certain situations where you really should not take mugwort internally. And so if that's something you're curious about, talk to a trained and skilled herbalist, naturopath, someone who has a lot of robust knowledge about this herb. But how I love to work with mugwort and would invite our listeners to become curious about working with mugwort is through an energetic and a spiritual lens. This is a plant that is so beloved by witches and folk magic practitioners because this plant enhances our dreams. So if you are someone that is curious about astral travel in the dream realm, or just simply receiving messages, guidance from your ancestors, from the divine, from your spirit guides in your dreams, mugwort supports you in this realm. Mugwort supports us in enhancing and having more vivid dreams and with dream recall. And so mugwort, one of the ways that a lot of herbalists will work with mugwort is by making a mugwort pillow. So you can have the dried plant sewn inside fabric in a pillow that you can place under your pillow at nighttime, so that you can dream with mugwort and invite mugwort's energetic and spiritual properties into the dream realm with you. How I personally work with mugwort is, as this is my go-to plant for spiritual hygiene, energetic hygiene. And so I will harvest these leafy green stems. So as you can see in the picture, beautiful leafy and green. And on the top side, there's beautiful, vibrant green color. And on the underside is this silvery color, just like the color of the moon and the moon's light. That's another connection. And so I love to cut a couple, harvest a few strands of mugwort and then tie them together and dry them. And then I burn that dried wand to create a smoke that I use to energetically cleanse my body, to cleanse my space. I did this before the podcast today. And mugwort is just such a beloved ally in cleansing and protection, and connecting us with our dreams and our intuition. And so mugwort is another plant that is really great to bathe with if you like to take cleansing spiritual baths. And of course, connecting with the moon, connecting with Cancer, taking a bath to relax, to cleanse, and also to connect with our intuitions. And so mugwort is a great plant that you can have as like a tea in the bath, or even just sprinkle some dried mugwort into the bath. So I love this plant. There is so much more that I could say, but I just thank you, mugwort, for being such a beloved ally to so many. And with that, I will turn it over to Dani to get us into Cancer season for today.
Thank you, Mugwort. Thank you, the Four of Pentacles. One thing I wanted to add to the Four of Pentacles thing, I just want to throw this out here now, is that there is a benefit in stabilizing. The Four of Pentacles comes after the Three of Pentacles, which is like to me, a team of people like working together to make something happen and manifest it. And the Four of Pentacles is like, oh, we have a little bit of traction here, you know? So I don't want to like talk too much negativity necessarily about it. I want to like just honor that it's about that security thing and about stabilizing. And also when things are destabilized, how we respond to that and how we work with that is really important because it can turn into some of the things we were talking about with the Four of Pentacles, which is like the overprotection and greediness. So, but it's not necessarily a bad thing to have some stability and like boundaries and groundedness. Let's talk about Cancer. So we just want to talk about first about like just the Cancer archetype. So Cancer is, you know, we talk about planet, what planet rules it, what element is it? So earth, fire, water, air, and is the modality. This, you know, astrology is math, okay? It's just this plus this plus this, and a lot of other things. So the modality is the one that's maybe the least familiar to people who know nothing about astrology. So I'll just tell a little bit about that. That is the quality or way that a sign moves energy. And that energy is elemental energy. So it's like the modality says, does it initiate? Is it cardinal? Does it stabilize? Is it fixed? Or does it move energy like in a back and forth way, which is the mutable energy? Okay. So there's only three that we choose from. Each sign has a different combination of those three things: the planet, the element, and the modality. So Cancer is a cardinal modality, cardinal initiatory sign. Its element is water, which has to do with the emotions and the emotional body. And there's some element of connection there too. And then the planet that rules Cancer is the moon, our beautiful moon. So we're going to talk a little bit about all of those things. As far as the Cancer archetype, cardinal water. So it's in cardinal signs initiate. They take action. They start things. They move things along. They begin seasons. So Cancer season starts on the solstice when winter in the southern hemisphere and summer in the northern hemisphere begin. So Cancer initiates that season, and it's a water sign. So it's the initiator of the emotional body. It's the initiator of that water energy. So what does that water energy look like? Water is, you know, 70+% of our world and our bodies are made of water. Water is belonging, being a part of something greater. Since Cancer initiates the emotional body, it deepens the emotional bonds that Gemini, the little networker connector, has started. So it makes things deeper. And it also creates a sense of home. You know, that's the whole thing with belonging. We're going to talk more about Jupiter a little later, but Jupiter, the planet of expansion and abundance, is exalted in Cancer. It's really happy to be there. And this season we do have Jupiter in Cancer. And Jupiter adds an element of expansiveness to this archetype, to the Cancer archetype. So family, the idea of home and family as being something expansive, a web of emotional belonging. Cancer is a nourisher. It's all about nourishment. It rules over the breast and the stomach. So it has to do with how we like food, our first food from the breast, right? From the body, how our bodies pass information to each other via our first food. Cardinal signs, like I said, they're initiators, they take action. So Cancer acts to take care. Cancer takes actions to nourish, to care for, to create a sense of belonging. The crab, so the crab is the Cancer symbol. That's what the constellation is in astrology. People have identified the Cancer constellation as something across cultures. There's been several cultures that have identified Cancer as something, and it very often is animal with a hard outer shell and a soft underbelly. So Cancer is the crab, but it's also been the beetle. It's also been a lobster. So there's something about protection and caretaking and creating a secure, safe container for something tender and something precious. I'm going to pass it over to I want you two to give your takes on Cancer energy.
Yeah, I can jump in. For me, it's like Cancer is it's like a felt sense. When I think of like, I have my Mars is in Cancer, and like Mars is that energy, willpower that like really moves me through the world. And for me, it's in a very intuitive way. So I really like to think of the sign of Cancer as like feeling your way through, right? Like it's not necessarily like an intellectual logic, ration. It's like, I have a feeling about this thing, like I'm being pulled in this direction, or, right, like when you connect with someone, like Dani said, emotional bonding, emotional nourishment, that is a felt sense. Like, when you connect with someone, there is a felt sense in the body, and the body has signals and responses that informs us, that gives us information that maybe is not coming directly from the brain, but is still coming from, and I just want to honor like how wise the body is. And like Dani said, Cancer rules the stomach. And I am training to be an herbalist, and my background is in just health. Like I got my degree in community health in college. I think of like this gut brain connection, which we are learning a lot more about, I think, in the collective, and there's more collective awareness around this. But within the gut, which would be more of the intestines than the stomach, but still the stomach and the gut being connected, right? Like when we say you have like a gut feeling, there's an entire nervous system within the lining of the gut, like the enteric nervous system. And there is wisdom, there is information. And when we say that we have a gut feeling and like trust your gut, that's very Cancerian. That's like, it's a lunar sense, it's intuition, and it's like learning to trust that. So all of that is really what I think about Cancer. It's like feeling my way through things, having a knowing about things, and trusting that. That is how I relate to Cancer.
Love that. I'm just sitting here like, yes, to both of what y'all are saying. I think of Cancer. My connection with Cancer is through my Capricorn placements. I don't have any planets in Cancer, but that's my seventh house. And in astrology, we have our ascendant, which is representative of us and our direction and sort of how we approach new situations. And then our descendant speaks more to both the kinds of people that we draw into our lives and want to be in relationship with. And Emily said, you said this to me a while ago. You also talked about how the seventh house, the descendant, is kind of indicative of how you are in relation with others. And so since you said that, I've really been thinking about my approach to relations with others is super lunar, really intuitive, really guided of like, oh, this person activates me in like a really positive way. And so I also have the sun on my ascendant. And so something that I've been thinking a lot about as I get older is that tension between relationship and yourself. That's for me specifically. But if we zoom it out a little bit more and look at the axis of Capricorn and Cancer, we see a lot of similarities. I feel like both of you have been touching on this idea of like hard exterior shell, soft underbelly. Both Capricorn and Cancer have that energy where you're like, there's a lot going on in that emotional, like underneath the surface, but we might not always see that. And like it comes out in intimacy and intimate relationships. I would say that Cancers are perhaps a little bit, because it's water and it's a little more fluid in terms of how it experiences things in their body. I would say that they might appear to be a little more emotional than say Capricorn, but that doesn't mean that Capricorn is like not emotional. It's just that there might be, because that earth sensibility, there might be more layers before you have to peel back to get that. But both of them have this sort of sense of like, I am projecting strong, powerful protection. And also part of that is because they're so soft inside that they need that sort of like security. I also think about the Capricorn Cancer axis relating to parenting. I don't necessarily prescribe the idea that like Cancer is mommy and the Capricorn is daddy. Like I think that that can be helpful, and also knowing too that there's so many ways that we can be parents and nurturers. And so I really do think though there's something to be said about the axis of responsible caretaking. I think what's really interesting is that when you look at the planetary rulers, you have Saturn opposing the moon. And it's interesting too, because Saturn opposes both luminaries. When you look at Leo and Aquarius, you also have the axis of Sun and Saturn. And I was like sitting with that and thinking, what is Saturn's role in relationship with the luminaries? In this sense, with Cancer, Saturn is like, yes, invest, be nourishing, care for others, and make sure that you're caring for yourself. Make sure that you're not giving, and not taking anything back. I think codependency could maybe also be in this axis of the resentment. When you don't have strong boundaries, you might resent the care that you give to others. And so I think like Capricorn and Saturn's role is really important because again, like we're always like astrology is all about relationship and they're all in relationship with each other. And so that's why we always like to talk about the opposite sign and how they relate and speak to this axis.
Can I talk a little bit about Cancer, like as the emotional side of this axis? Like, I think Cancer gets a rap sometimes for like crying all the time. And I do know Cancers, like one of my Cancer besties, like makes a joke that every single thing, it results in some tears, but it's a different kind of crying. It's not like your whole day is just sobbing in your bed and you can't do anything like a Pisces would be, because I'm a Pisces moon and I know that. But like it's more like everything kind of like invokes this sort of deep emotional connection and response. But honestly, the Cancers that I know are very practical. I think this axis has something to do with that. Like my mom is a Cancer sun and like that. So it's such a deep connection that I have. And I am the other cardinal signs. I'm Aries Libra. So like I exist in a square axis to this Cancer Capricorn axis. And I like my relationship to Cancers is like they are some of the most like magical. They have a magical ability to keep people together and to like create bonds, with people that help people to feel safe. Like my mom has always been about belonging. Like before we had language for it to talk about it being a Cancer thing, like she's always thought about like she didn't want to give us weird names because she didn't want us to feel different. You know what I mean? She is very like thinking about, when one of the worst things you could do growing up was to be mean to some other kids, like she was like, I didn't raise you to be mean to people. I raised you to be like accepting of people and to help people and to bring people in. If kids were being kicked out by their parents for being gay or for having like some, getting into trouble in some way, or they were going through something. They were just like fighting with their parents or something. Like my mom opened her doors. If my family, like our extended family didn't have a place to go, needed a place to go, they didn't have money, they lost their house. There was so many circumstances where my mother took in people. We always joke that she takes in the strays. When there was these two stray cats outside, she became really close to one of them and she literally built him a little house with heating pads and insulation. I'm not even joking. And she feeds him, and you know what I mean? Like, I call her and now she's retired and she lives on Lake Winnebago. I call her and she'll be like, my duck family's here. And she'll be like, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Like she knows how many babies the ducks all have. You know what I'm saying? Like there's a magic there in being able to like, like she cares about the well-being and the belonging of everybody, like deeply, like, and it's such an intuitive felt sense. And she also has a Cancer Mars. She has a Cancer stellium. So like she also, there's other things. But yeah, I just want to say that about Cancer. Like she doesn't do it in a way that is like overly emotional. Like she is very practical about it. You know, she's not like over babies. She's not. And even when people would live in our house, she always had a little bit of distance. She's also an Aquarius moon, so she's got that Saturnian thing too, where she was like, okay, a little bit of distance. Like she's kind of distant. You know, people are like, does your mom like me? But it's like, it doesn't really matter because it's not about her liking you. She's like, I will create a space for you to belong and for you to have a safe place to be. But I'm not necessarily going to like overstep my boundaries emotionally and like try to love all these people as deeply as I love my own children, because the love she has for her own children already breaks her heart as a Cancer. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, that's my take on Cancer.
Just goes to show.
That makes me think of the Four of Pentacles, your mom being really good with those boundaries and having that Saturn and all those Cancer placements and that Aquarius moon that rules all of those Cancer. It's like there does need to be a level of like healthy detachment is what I feel like I hear a lot in spiritual spaces, where it's like we can love so hard, we can care so hard, and exactly what you said about your mom, that breaks her own heart, right? When you love, because love and grief are two sides of the same coin. I feel like our capacity for love is also our capacity for grief, right? Like, because ultimately everything and everyone and every being that we love, we will lose at some point, which is like, that's where that sadness and that grief side of Cancer, when you love and care and cherish so much. And I wanted to bring in what we talked about before we started recording, but like, Aryn, I think you said like mother with a capital M, where with Cancer, which like in queer spaces, mother very much as like, you know, in ballroom culture and drag culture, like the head of the family and the chosen family. That's something that we've talked a lot about on this podcast because we are all a part of the queer community here, but just that chosen family. But I was just thinking about Cancer and mother and just how like mothering can be like, how can we take mother, that concept, that way of being, which is so Cancerian, and just like open it up and make it so spacious. And I read this newsletter a couple months ago, and I think it came out on Mother's Day, and the writer wrote about how mother is like simply the act of tending to life. And I was like, yes, right? And that goes beyond gender, beyond nuclear family. Any single one of us can nurture and tend to life, and that can be an act of mothering. Aryn, what were you going to say?
When Dani was talking about this sort of emotional generosity that her mom displays, it really connected of perhaps that's why Jupiter exalts in Cancer, is that it feels really comfortable to like, yeah, to like share emotional resources, to share that caretaking, and to see it as like, it doesn't, it sort of goes against that nuclear family where it's like you only care about your kin or your immediate kin. It's like, no, we care about everybody. Everybody is family. Everybody is kin. So I think Jupiter in Cancer really like brings that back, and to see that bigger picture of connectivity, which is so true. Like, I feel like the more I research my ancestry, I'm like, other people are connected to me, maybe not in exact literal nuclear ways, or like we're not first cousins, but I'm like, wow, look at these people who lived centuries ago who have all these other kids who went in different. So yeah, I think the web, like family trees, feel Cancerian too, that connectivity between generations, timelines.
That's the Cancer-Capricorn axis for sure, like a family tree, you know? Yeah. Do you want to talk about the moon, Emily? Because the moon rules Cancer, and that's so important to the Cancer energy.
Yes. I'd love to talk about the moon. I'm wearing my moon earrings today. Got a little crescent moon. Hard to see, but I'm wearing my moon earrings in honor of the moon. I love the moon. I'm a very solar person, and I will say at the same time, I like deeply love the moon. And I just think the moon has so many gifts and so many blessings. And I've really been sinking into like living cyclically, and like how actually we are, because we are all of the earth, we are not separate from the earth. And also bringing back in that sense of belonging. We all belong to this earth because we are not separate from the earth. We are of the earth. We are children of the earth. We are part of the web of life. And It's actually a colonial construct that severs humans from the earth and like makes the earth inanimate. That's a colonial harmful construct. And the earth mirrors, like I think the moon really, like her cycle like is a mirror of the cycles and the seasons here on earth. So I want to get into that, but just starting with like the basics of this beautiful luminary. So we have two luminaries, and in astrology we call the luminaries planets as well. And the sun is our star that we all orbit around, and the moon is our nighttime luminary. She is our closest celestial body. She is the one that is the closest to us physically. And it's so interesting, even though the sun and the moon are actually like literally very different in size, from our perspective here on Earth, they are the exact same size. Isn't that magical? Like, that is so cool. Like, there's like, you can't have one without the other. We need both. Um, and so the moon is our nighttime luminary. She is our celestial satellite that orbits the Earth. And she is the fastest moving celestial body. In the terms of astrology, she is moving through all 12 zodiac signs every 28-ish days. That is the length of her cycle. And it's a consistent pattern. She's moving through all 12 signs, and she is waxing and she is waning, and she is in a direct relationship with the sun. And her cycle, her phases, her waxing, her waning, from new moon all the way to the dark moon. So you can break this up in many different phases, but there's new moon, waxing crescent, first quarter, full moon, last quarter, balsamic, and then new again. Those are the phases that she consistently moves through, and you can break those up into even smaller phases. That is all about her relationship to the sun and her position where she is in orbit around the Earth, and that relationship between the Earth, moon, and sun. And so she is receiving that, the moon receives the sun's light and reflects it back to us on Earth. And that is so beautiful. I think Cancer and the moon is all about being receptive, receiving, reflecting, and just this cycle. Like, we are all like, we live in this capitalist society and a colonial society that has like stripped us from our roots. So one, our own human ancestry, and stripped us from our roots, literally from the earth, to say that we are separate, and has stripped us from these like innate cyclical ways of being. Capitalism says that we must be working 40 to 80 plus hours a week, that we must be these little machines working to feed the like economy and like feed the capitalist machine to just keep it going to generate profit. And that like the fallacy of capitalism is that there is infinite growth, that essentially if you looked at a graph, that it would just be a straight, like it would be a diagonal line that just says over time you can just continue to grow and grow and grow into infinity. That is false. That is against the laws of nature. That is against the laws of the universe. And actually, in medical terms, that like infinite growth, that's cancer. And that would be the disease cancer, not the sign of cancer, that ravages, that is a disease of just infinite cell replication. So the moon really roots us into that. There are periods of rest. There are periods of darkness. There are periods where our energy is waning, where we are not meant to be out there being visible, working, expressing, right? Like, we actually all of us need to have time to retreat into our shells. So that was my winding conversation about the moon. But yeah, Dani and Aryn, what do you think about with the moon?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important to remember the cyclical nature of the moon. And something you told me yesterday, Emily, when we were doing our prep meeting, you were like, yeah, I feel like in the beginning of Cancer season, I was feeling so out there and alive. And like now I'm feeling like a lot more needing rest and like inward and, stuff like that. And then even today, you were like, I'm feeling a little more out there and alive and, ready to be out there. And so I'm like, I think that's really relevant for Cancer season and Cancer energy, is for you to be like in that cycle, and the moon ruling the tides, ruling the emotional or the actual waters inside of the earth, governing that shifting and that changing, like the body's water, the ebbing and flowing that happens in the body. Also, our menstrual cycles are the same timing as the moon cycles. So there's definitely like that concept of everything moves in cycles. Everything is like farming calendars are based on the moon. Like people consider surgery based on the moon. You know what I'm saying? Like that still is a practice because again, it does govern the bodies of water and the tides. So I just think that's one of the coolest things ever. I just think it's so beautiful because it really does root us in our connection to the laws of nature. And I think that's extremely important to be in connection to that because that is what magic is like understanding the laws of nature and working within that and how you can work within that. It's not breaking the laws of nature. It's not like surpassing the laws of nature, it's like being inventive within this container. So I just think that's a really beautiful aspect of our lovely moon.
It's also super subjective. Like in astrology, it's our subconscious, it's our body, it's our internal processing. And even thinking about, our perception of the phases have so much to do with our location on Earth. Because if we're in the solar system, the moon doesn't change shape, it's just the reflections of light. And so I think that's really cool. And I think astrology is always speaking about the fact that we are in relationship with the earth and the universe and located on our earth, and that shifts and changes how we relate and like perceive things. So I do feel like the moon is a celestial body that does connect us to those rhythms, and also like our perspective as humans on earth, and our perspective as we're not in the sky but we're observing the sky and we're seeing these things. And so I feel like, honestly, Emily, your work that you've done, a lot of your attunement and your sort of relationship with the moon has inspired me a lot to just be more aware. I've even started to like write down what moon phase or what sign the moon is in my journals, just so I can be like, oh, okay. And also, a psychic told me recently, they were like, your ancestors were really connected to the moon, and like that is like an access point for you. And I would say probably most of our ancestors are, right? Like at some point in time. So it does feel like that's something that everybody can tap into, right? Even if they don't know their family has that tradition or lineage. Like just by being a human on this earth, like what Dani just said, there's so many connections to agriculture and our body cycles. So everybody benefits from tapping into the moon.
Can you all share what your moon phases are? Because moon phases in astrology are really interesting. So I want to know.
I was born under a waxing gibbous.
What does that look like again? Just for everybody to know.
Yeah, so that's like when the moon is looking pretty full. It's not quite a full moon, it's a few stages before that. And so actually, so like I have a Taurus moon, a Capricorn sun. If I had been born a few days later, I would have been born on a full moon. So waxing gibbous is that culmination. I very much see it as like I am that kind of person where like I'm so activated when the moon is waxing, because that's sort of like my natural state to build, build, build. I'm finding more recently though that I need to like learn to deal with waning energy and like the opposite end of that. Like I can't always be building and culminating and like trying to reach the top. So that's something that I've noticed for myself.
Yeah, for me, I was born just after a new moon. So I have a Taurus sun and my moon is 31 degrees away in Gemini. So even though it's in the neighboring sign, I was still born in a new moon phase. I love, so that's the thing about my relationship with the moon is I have in the last year really rooted my relationship into like a physical relationship and really moon gazing and getting to know the cycles. Like I told Dani yesterday, I've seen the moon every day this week in the morning sky. And so my phase of the moon that I was born under, this would be visible just like at sunset, like when the moon is just starting to creep away from the sun. And there's like a tiny little sliver. So I'm kind of on like the end of the new moon creeping towards waxing crescent. And like I totally connect with new moon energy. Um, Aryn and I just both read this book series called Curious Tides. Amazing book series, all about moon magic and this amazing world building. And in this book series, the magical students who are born under the phase of the new moon, they are healers. And so I do really connect this like healing energy to the new moon. And so I just connect, like, I'm like, yeah, I really feel like healing, emotional healing, physical healing through nourishment is very much something I'm here to embody and do in this lifetime, and that feels connected to the new moon. And also, I really like to start things. I love the beginning of things. I like to generate ideas. I'm an emotional manifester in human design. And so I really connect with this like new moon, which also feels linked to springtime energy to me. And also, like Aryn, I struggle with the waning I really struggle with that.
It's so funny. I'm like the other side of the new moon. I'm right before the new moon in the balsamic phase, which is the last phase of the moon cycle before it enters into the new moon. So it has a lot to do with shedding and like letting go and entering into a place of mystery. And it's particularly poignant for me because it is a Pisces moon, which Pisces is the last sign of the zodiac. So there's this book I had for a while that named the archetype of each phase and each sign. And for the balsamic, like waning crescent in Pisces, it was the mystic's moon. So there's something about also for me, because I have my north node is there, there's also something, and which means that eclipses are nearby, my moon as well is an element of like faded or ancestral like relationships and connections and beliefs and all of that kind of stuff that I am like letting go of to create something new. You know what I'm saying? There's like an element of like turning over. Also, my sun happens to be in the next sign of Aries. So like there's an element for me of like endings and beginnings. But definitely like my connection to this is gonna sound like a little bit like, I don't know, like morbid is the word I'm looking for, but I do have a connection to death. Like I have Pluto in my first house in Scorpio, my Venus, which rules my rising sign of Libra is in my eighth house. So I have this connection to death that's almost like this like meaningful and deepening relationship that I have to it. Like how do we make meaning out of death? Like I don't know, how do we look like use it, compost it to create something new? You know, I have a sense of optimism about death. So yeah, I think that's how that shows up for me. Does anyone else have any?
I love hearing I was just saying, I love how we all have such different phases too, right? Like, and it's cool, Dani. Yours is at the very, actually, we're all pretty spaced out. That's wild because I'm like the very beginning. Aryn's almost like the midpoint and you're like the very end. That's very cool. I love that for us. Um, the last thing I wanted to talk about with the moon, that I was really reflecting on this morning as I was going through a walk through the neighborhood is the moon's connection to the third house in astrology, which is in any astrology chart, whether it's a birth chart, an event chart, right? Like the third house is the house of the moon's joy. So in traditional astrology, each of those 7 planets has a house that is their planetary joy. It's the house that they rejoice in. It's just the house that they love to be in. They really thrive there. And so the moon thrives in the third house, which is like I have such a deep connection to this house. I feel like I'm a very third house person. The third house is our local community. It's literally like the interactions and the relationships in your immediate environment. We also get like siblings and cousins in the third house because it's those people in the family and in the extended family that you start to relate to after, right, when you're kind of just in the cocoon of like being a young child, being a baby. It's really like your primary caretakers. And then as you get older, it's like extending relationships beyond the core caretaking or caregivers. And so for me, the third house as an adult, it's like it's my relationship with my neighborhood, with the city that I live in, but specifically the neighborhood that I'm in. And also it's like the places you can get to on foot, or the places I think like to think of I can get to by bicycle, like short distance travel. And the moon rejoices here because like the moon is a very like fast moving celestial body. Like her cycle is consistent and it's also really quick. She's only in a single phase for like 2.5 days and then is moving on to the next phase. And so if we think about like short distance travel, you can get places quick. Like, and just like you can travel quickly around your local environment. So there's just this connection between the moon and the third house. And this is also the house, it's called the house of the goddess. In traditional astrology, there's also a connection to ritual. And it's like the mundane aspect of ritual. It's like the actual, like sitting at the altar, lighting the candle, burning the incense, shuffling of the tarot cards. Like these are all pretty mundane practices. And the moon, like, really connects to the mundane in life. And that it's actually how do we bring, like, draw out the magic and the meaning in these mundane practices and rituals. And so I just love that connection between the moon and the third house. All right, shall we get into some of the transits?
Yeah, so we're going to talk about this Cancer season. So, whenever we talk about a season, the name of a season, Cancer season, we're talking about the sun being in Cancer. The sun is every time each year we live in a solar calendar world, we work on a solar calendar. So the sun is in the same place about the same time each year. And so it's usually between the 20th of June to the 22nd of July. That can shift a little bit per year, but this year it was June 20th to July 22nd. The sun was in Cancer. So we are going to talk about what the sun in Cancer was doing, as well as the ruler of Cancer, which is the moon, as we've been talking about. So what the moon was doing, the lunations this year. The sun made a Cazimi, or a conjunction, with Jupiter, who has just moved into Cancer in Gemini season, on June 24th. So we're going to talk about that and the connection to the primaries in New York for mayor, where Zohran Mamdani came out as victor in those primaries. And then we're going to also talk about the big, beautiful bill on the United States' birthday, or solar return in Cancer, as well as their Jupiter return in Cancer on July 4th. And then we're also going to talk about Uranus, one of the outer planets that has to do with change, disruption, revolution, has just moved from Taurus into Gemini on July 7th. So we're going to reflect a little on what Uranus in Taurus was like, as well as what we could expect from Uranus's move into Gemini. So, Emily, do you want to talk about the Sun-Jupiter conjunction in Cancer on the 24th?
Yes. So I would say a Jupiter Cazimi could be seen as like one of the luckiest days of the year. And this had extra like magic and abundance to it because Jupiter is exalted in Cancer, as we've been mentioning. And so when the sun, when a Cazimi happens, I love a Cazimi. I think a Cazimi is like my favorite transit in astrology, especially a Venus Cazimi, a Jupiter Cazimi. I love a Mercury Cazimi. And essentially, a new moon is a Kazimi as well, right? Like any time. And Kazimi is rooted in an Arabic word that translates to in the heart of. And so this means Jupiter and a Cazimi. Jupiter is in the heart of the sun. And whenever another planet is in the heart of a sun, just think of it like a new moon. It's like there's a refresh, a rebirth. And I love to think of our physical star, the sun, just infusing this planet with all of this healing solar energy. And they are just like, I think a Cazimi, my favorite visualization is like, if you ever played Mario when you were a kid, or if you are currently playing any Mario games, when he would eat the star, the rainbow star, and then just have like that rainbow star aura around them, and like Mario Kart, like that's what I think of with Cazimi energy. So just think of consuming that rainbow star and you have this rainbow aura. And so this is like a very magical, very, in astrology, we would say auspicious day. And it's very exciting because we need some wins, right? Like we are going through very hard times. As I'm hearing these damn blue angels freaking like soar over my house right now, it's very irritating to me because we have a literal war machine. Like the United States, has the entire is a war machine apparatus that goes out and conquers and pillages and destroys people and destroys land with these war machines, with these planes that they are then propping up as entertainment for people. It's really sick. It really is very sick to me. And so I just think with a lot of what's happening in the world right now, we really need to highlight the wins when they happen. And I will be the first one to say electoral politics are not going to save us. And at the same time, I think I feel really giddy about this win in New York. So, specifically on the exact Jupiter Cazimi, which was Tuesday, June 24th. This was the day of the mayoral election primaries in New York City. And there has been this incredible candidate, Zohran Mamdani, who is a unapologetic democratic socialist. He's Muslim, he's pro-Palestine, he's pro-working class. He won the New York mayoral primary, and no one expected him to win. No one, right? Like there's all these talking heads, there's all these pundits in the political sphere, right? There's all these strategists that are, doing whatever they do, strategizing about the image you have to portray, the words that you have to say, the messages that you have to convey, right? Like they really fit these like if you are someone running for office and you have these strategists or advisors around you, they're basically saying these are the boxes that you have to fit into. And I feel like Mamdani is just like, I am me and I am unapologetically me. I am not going to water down like my religion, who I am, my beliefs. Like, I'm not going to water any of that down. I'm just going to be me and I'm going to connect with people on a human to human level. And so his campaign has been all about talking to New Yorkers and listening. And just listening to what is impacting them. And his campaign, which in this day and age, it's really ridiculous to me, actually, that being a democratic socialist or being someone that is for policies that are like support fulfilling the basic needs of humans is seen as radical. Like how ridiculous, how freaking ridiculous is it that it's radical that you would believe in having policy that would give people food and housing, right? Like that's
Reframe.
seen as radical.
Well, reframe. Radical, the word just means from the root. So honestly, it actually is radical to advocate for all of those things because that's what the root of everything is meeting our basic needs. So I just want to say, like, it's not, radical
Exactly.
isn't a bad thing. You know what I mean?
The word radical. I love embodying radical energy, absolutely, to grasp at the root. Yeah, and it's just in this, right, like in the mainstream political arena, radical is used as a derogatory word, right? It's a word that's specific party, like, politicians will use that word to shame people. Look at that extremist, look at that radical. And radical is not a bad word at all. I love that word. So his campaign has simply been talking to New Yorkers and being like, what do you care about? What do you need? And essentially everyone's like, rent is too damn high. I'm getting pushed out of my neighborhood. I'm losing my house. My family has lived here for generations, and we are getting pushed out of this city that we freaking built. This beautiful multicultural, multi-ethnic, city that is just such a beautiful blending of so many different ethnicities, so many different immigrants that have come together and have really built this city into what it is. And so he's been very real. He's like, I stand for a rent freeze. I am here to improve public transit. Okay, so here's the moon again. One of the big issues is like New Yorkers are really upset about the degradation of their public transit system. They have the longest bus route times in the country. And so it makes it really hard for working class people to go to where they need to go to work, to home, to childcare, right? Like, and he's like, all right, we need to improve our infrastructure. I think public transit, very third house, and we can have that lunar connection, right? Those ways that you travel in your local environment. Childcare, of course, childcare costs are exorbitant. It is impossible for many people, especially working class and poor people, to afford childcare. And yet we are all forced to sell our labor to survive. And if you are a parent, who is going to take care of your kids if you don't have that village around you, as many of us do not have a village around us anymore to share in that labor of childcare? So he's just speaking to the issues, and all the issues are meeting people's basic needs, basic human needs that we all deserve to have met. And his campaign is based on government should be improving the lives of the people and should be meeting the people's needs. And so this is just a very exciting win. I think it is a stark contrast to and a direct confrontation to the fascism that is unfolding globally. And I think it really is like a beautiful mandate. And so he even turned like a bunch of Trump voters voted for him. So it is a win that I want to celebrate because I think it is very exciting. So yeah, that's
And
what
it
I have to say about that.
happened on Jupiter, the planet of abundance, coming together with the sun in Cancer, which is all about nourishment and meeting basic needs. So, it makes sense that we get this win at that time. Do we want to pull up the US's natal chart again? We've done this in the past. We've looked at the US's natal chart, but we're going to look at it now because the US happens to be a Cancer sun and Jupiter. So, Aryn, do you want to lead this part of it as we look at this chart?
Yes, absolutely. So the Big Beautiful Bill is basically a really big document that sort of defines Trump's a lot of his policies, has lots to do with the budget. It's very all encompassing, and to be honest, there's so much information out there that is like conflicting, which I think we could probably find in the chart. But essentially, what this bill has been very contentious because a lot of the policies are not in alignment with what the administration is saying. I actually pulled up the White House website. They have an article about myth versus fact. And it's like so ridiculous because it's saying like the big beautiful bill kicks American families off Medicaid. That's the myth. And then the fact it says there will be no cuts to Medicaid. But then it's like, but you look at the bill and you look at how people are interpreting and what they're saying, and it just feels like I don't know. It feels like a culmination of a lot of American culture, which makes sense, right? That this would be coinciding with both the Jupiter and solar return of the U.S. natal chart. So before we were on this, we were talking about how the US Cancer sun is so reactive. It's so like it's almost like proactively violent and aggressive. And also I want to distinguish too. We're talking about mundane astrology now, which is like the study of astrology as it relates to current events. So it's different. It's a different branch than natal astrology. So it's not to say that like the US has a Cancer sun, and if you have a Cancer sun, you're an oppressive war machine. Like it's not that at all. But we can look at how the signs can function in these ways, right? And so I feel like the US has this like almost like it's like the crab is like ready to stab. Like it's really like overreactive. It needs to act. It needs to like take charge and act. We know that sometimes that energy is not appropriate. Sometimes it's not tactful, depending on what you're doing, right? And so it's literally like, calm down, like, chill out. But the US has that sort of signature of being aggressive, even just thinking about the way that we frame justice and freedom. It's very much like we take freedom for ourselves. It's like,
And we protect ourselves from foreign enemies, you know, it's very
yeah,
like protective, fear-based stuff like that.
me versus them. I have to protect my resources in order for you not to take them, which is basically justification the US has used for fucking centuries to justify war and genocide and oppression. And also, there's always ways that we can look at the astrology of the moment and we can see other realities as well. I think the Big Beautiful Bill puts on display the agenda of the US. And really, like when we're thinking about it, the context of the beginning of the US is literally the same as now, that a singular or smaller group of people have freedom, right? But their freedom is often at the cost of another. Or even this idea of like, we are freeing ourselves from illegal immigration, right? We are freeing ourselves from whatever the fuck. And so there's a distortion here. There's a, you know, colonialism, patriarchy, like all of these are filtered in the fabrics of the United States. So to me, it's not so surprising that something like this exacerbates that tradition and that history and that legacy. And I'm looking in the chart here too, because I wonder, I'm thinking a lot about Neptune and Saturn being close to each other, but let me see. Okay, so in this chart, Emily's pointing to Saturn and Neptune both at early degrees of Aries, and that is squaring not the US sun yet, but it is squaring Venus and Jupiter at that too. So that Jupiter return is is like expanding, bringing to the surface, creating like bigger sort of realities of that current transit. And so I think that has something to do with the way that people, so many people are confused about this bill. So many people don't quite understand like what it's doing. And actually, I would say most people are against it. I saw an article, I have to double check this. It was only one article, but they said 6 out of 10 Americans did not approve of the big beautiful bill. So in addition to when we're seeing these actions and these moves, we're also seeing the collective sort of be like, wait a second, even Trump supporters, wait a second, this is not what I signed up for. This is not what was like how I understood this would be. And so I do think that at the same time it's scary and it's exacerbating a lot of these existing issues, and to the point where a positive from that, or at least like a consequence that could lead to positive change, is that people are in it and they're starting to see and they're starting to like almost have this I think the cognitive dissonance is really what's happening for a lot of Americans, especially Americans that were under the impression that someone like Trump could fix things. I think the like allure of this sort of Americana perspective is starting to disintegrate as people begin to be like, actually this affects me as well. And so it also feels on the nose and also shitty at the same time that during a Jupiter in Cancer transit, we're creating like the government is passing policies that literally strip our institutions of care, like even just like getting kicked off Medicaid. That is literally like a realm that Cancer would rule or govern, and so it's being taken away, it's being reoriented. And that's a pattern that we're seeing a lot with the Trump administration, is this sort of intentional bludgeoning of public services in order to create this sense of like um almost like intentional lack, or even justification of like, I don't know, it reminds me of that meme of, I think it's Eric Andre, where he like shoots someone. He's like, how could you do that? Like that's how the US feels to me. They destroy things and then they're like, well, this is run to the ground. I guess we have to embrace military fascism now. And so it's like clear to the people who can see that, right? Who have studied that, who have disentangled from that delulu. I don't know. I think there's something to be said about the fact that Jupiter is conjunct Venus in the chart too. Like there's something sort of delusional about the US and like their
Well,
self-image, which maybe
can
is
I say something about
exacerbated by the
that?
exalted Cancer.
Okay. I want to say something about that specifically, the Jupiter return thing. So if we can just point this out, when we say Jupiter return, what we're talking about is the planet Jupiter is at the same exact degree on the signing of the big beautiful bill. It was the same degree that it is when the United States was born on July 4th, 1776. So that's what we're saying, is that this big planet of abundance, our ideals, like, it's the king of the zodiac. It's got to do with, expansion of things, and it's returning right here. And it happens to be in the United States' eighth house. Is that the United States' eighth house? So there, and it also is conjunct Venus, which has to do with values. And the eighth house, I think of the eighth house as like death and taxes is what I think about it. It's like the eighth house is shared resources and also peak experiences, like, and having to do with death and rebirth. So there's something here about Jupiter coming in and expanding the truth of the values that we have. Like Venus is values, and in the eighth house, it's like there is no escaping the truth of the values that we hold, that the United States holds. And honestly, those values, some of them are fine, but a lot of them are death cult energy. Okay. They are protective of resources. The Constitution was written for white slave owning men to protect their resources. So there is something about the exposition of that truth and of those values to everyone, to be like, all these life, liberty, pursuit of happiness things that we say that we guarantee, like all of that is not actually what's happening. Like the actual values are to protect over, we were talking about with Four of Pentacles, that overprotectiveness that can come in. And that is always how fascism gets power 100% of the time, is by setting up a crisis situation and making people so afraid that they comply or give up some of their autonomy and their power and their well-being in order to be protected by the fascist entity that caused the problem in the first place. So I just think that Jupiter conjunct the sun, and it's a loose conjunction to the sun, but it's still a conjunction. It's still a solar return. And the Jupiter return with Venus there in the United States' eighth house, like chef's kiss, like, yeah, they're really exposing themselves now.
I also want to point out this Uranus and Venus conjunction. So I also, sorry, we forgot to say that if you're not familiar, this would be considered a bi-wheel, where we have two charts, one overlaid on the other. The inside is the US's birth chart, and the outside are the transits of the day that this bill was signed into law, which again, there was a very symbolic nature to this. Like this was intentional. This was explicitly signed on the 4th of July, right? Like when we talk about the solar return, when, that is essentially the birthday of the United States. And this bill signing, which was a few weeks ago now, happened during the Venus and Uranus conjunction. So we're talking about the values of the United States as a nation founded, like Dani just said, white slave owning men whose resources are, humans as property and just private property in general. So these values are very much out of alignment with a majority, I would say, hopefully a majority of people in this country. And so we have this Venus-Uranus conjunction in Taurus. And I think that's going to be speaking to people who everyday working class people that this bill is going to have very negative implications on. And I think this like shaking up of values and this kind of like reckoning of like, okay, this bill was a budget bill. It was about how the federal government, how they allocate our like financial resources, which is our taxpayer dollars, right? Like we as the people who live in this country are paying into this tax system, and this tax system, again, very eighth house, these tax dollars are how the government is funding anything that the government funds, institutions, agencies, right? Like there are many government grants. And so it's like there's this, people are going to be, we're going to be experiencing the ripple effects of this probably for the rest of this administration, right? At least the next 3 to 4 years. And I feel like this Uranus and Venus conjunction in Taurus, right? Like the resource, right? Our resources, our finances, it's really shaking things up because it's really stripping. It's like very severe austerity. It's a withholding and a withdrawing of funds and of resources. It's like a slashing of programs like Medicaid, food stamps, right? Like a lot of these government funded programs. And I think this Uranus Venus conjunction is like, yeah, there's like going to be it's a huge cut and severing, and it's a huge shakeup. And how that's going to like affect all of us in this country.
Right. It's right before Uranus moved from Taurus into Gemini after being in Taurus for 7 years, too. It happened literally right before it, because July 7th is when Uranus moved. And whenever an outer planet moves, it always has a really big impact on the collective. So maybe, Emily, would you want to talk a little bit about Uranus and Taurus and like what that has meant for us over the past 7 years?
Yeah, absolutely. So Uranus has been in Taurus since 2018, and we talked quite a bit about Uranus during our Aquarius season Astro Church, because in modern astrology, Uranus is considered one of the rulers of the sign Aquarius. And so I really loved what Dani said about Uranus being the breaker of chains, right? Like Uranus is coming in and really shaking things up, releasing of the bonds, releasing of the chains, right? Like there can be a liberatory energy to the planet Uranus, and there's like a chaotic side of it as well, right? Like there is destabilization, right? Like revolution is not like, is liberation, revolution, like that is a massive like cracking open, that is a massive turning over of one old order into a new order and a new way of being on a collective level. And so there is like that's stressful, right? It's not easeful, it's not graceful, it is destabilizing. And then it's really, how do we respond? How do we come together to support one another through these really big cracks in the foundations? And how can we organize ourselves to build something that is better, to build something that is more nourishing? And so if we think about, we can look at the last 7 to 8 years. So since 2018, Uranus has been in Taurus. What specifically has the planet been shaking up? What cracks? I really think of Uranus and Taurus as like literally an earthquake coming through and a shaking up of the foundation and putting all these cracks and holes into the foundation, so that everything has to be rebuilt from the bottom up, right? So things that we've experienced on a collective level since 2018. Well, at the beginning of 2018, we had the first Trump administration, and that was a massive kind of changing up of the world order, if you will, that has now led us to the second Trump administration 8 years later. In 2020, 2 years into this transit, we had the COVID-19 pandemic, which changed everything, right? Like, and Taurus can also be rooted in physical health. And so we had this global pandemic, and we had lockdowns, we had massive economic impacts, massive job loss. Many people lost their jobs. We had these lockdowns. So people who worked in the service industry, in restaurants and bars, many businesses did not survive COVID because they could not be open and they could not receive their clients and customers in the same way that they did before the pandemic. There was like a massive isolation. So there were big economic kind of earthquake kind of changes happening. And in the last 8 years, we've seen the effects of global warming and climate catastrophe really increase as well, which also feels very Uranus and Taurus. We've had all of these wildfires across the globe, destructive. We've had horrible hurricanes. We've had horrible floods, right? Like these literal the earth literally responding to the destruction that has been just wreaked havoc across the globe by these systems in place, colonialism, capitalism, whose modality is to extract, and exploit. And now the earth is responding. The earth is in a deep state of disrepair and dis-ease, and there's deep healing that needs to be happening. So Aryn, you and I both have Taurus placements in our charts. Anything you would add, or anything on like a personal level that you felt since Uranus was in Taurus?
Yeah, I think when despite the fact that Uranus is a generational planet, it impacts us collectively, and also when it touches very personal planets in your natal chart, I see that sometimes as like the messages, meaning, themes can translate through those planets in your chart. So I think the personal is the collective is the personal. I think the outer planets transit luminaries in our natal charts, or personal planets can speak to that. So I have a moon at 23 degrees Taurus. So I had the privilege, the honor of Uranus on my moon, which my moon is also connected to like Pluto and my ascendant. For me, it really felt like a change up and a shift of my emotional processes. I realized I have a tendency for codependency. I ended a long term relationship kind of around that time that really put a lot of pressure on my intuitive interior processes. I would also say like that's my fourth house, or that's okay. So in whole sign astrology or house systems, sometimes the IC point, the darkest part of the chart, can go in the third house or the fifth house, or it could show up in the fourth house too. Mine is in the fifth house. I would imagine, so the last 7 years, I've literally moved so many times. I've literally moved states, moved houses, moved apartments. So it had a very literal translation also to when planets are transiting our angular houses. So our first house, our fourth house, our seventh house, our 10th house, especially those points, it can be more externalized change. So somebody could also have a Taurus moon, but it's not by an angle, and perhaps they might not have the same external experience as me. But mine was very like literal, in your face. Even Uranus, it's my fourth house, and my fourth house, or my IC point, is in my fifth house. So my creativity, it like kind of like, I don't know, brought out things that I wouldn't expect. Like now I'm kind of getting back into fashion design, which I was obsessed with when I was younger. So Uranus can really, it's not all negative, bad, right? Sometimes, like what Emily said, is that it can crack things open. And when things crack open, you see things that you might not have expected, or you wouldn't have discovered if it weren't for that, you know, that moment of shift and change. And so I really feel like I'm still processing the impact of that transit on me. And I think that's not something that just because it ends, we sort of have this full understanding of how it impacted and changed us. I'm interested to see as Uranus moves into Gemini, that always gives us the opportunity to reflect on where we've been and where we're going.
Yeah, Uranus and Gemini. So, the big beautiful bill is signed right at the very end. Emily pointed out that it was conjunct Venus, which also moved into a Gemini at the same time frame. So on July 7th, Monday, July 7th is when Uranus moved into Gemini. Usually 7 years-ish is Uranus's time in a sign. Uranus in Gemini to 33, May of 2033. But it will go back into Taurus for a final run at the end of this year into April of next year. But Uranus and Gemini, we don't try to predict in Astro Church. We're more reflective, but just some things that, were coming to mind for me about what Uranus and Gemini could look like. And it was interesting because it was July 4th, bills signed, right? And all the Republicans that said they weren't going to vote for it, knew their people didn't want it. Like they all but did it anyways, right? Come the next Monday, you saw everybody backpedaling. Aryn pointed out when they were talking about the big beautiful bill how there's all these myths and truths on the White House website, and they're not even true. Like they say they didn't cut Medicaid. Yes, they did cut Medicaid. They absolutely cutted Medicaid. Cut Medicaid. They cut SNAP. They cut so many basic needs things that their own base didn't want them to cut. They also increased the deficit. So all the rich Republicans I know are angry about that. And so now you have all this propaganda around the big beautiful bill and confusing people and shaking up, how we understand things and our ideas. So the reason I'm talking about this is because Uranus, as Emily mentioned, as Aryn mentioned, it's, unexpected shifts and like revolution and breaker of chains energy. But Gemini is the sign of like communication and propaganda, our journalism, the ideas that we have, the information and how it gets shared. So some sort of shakeup in our communications, information moving faster, or even having greater political consequence, how ideas and words can be used as tools for change and for radicalization. Also, we talked about the moon and this as the in traditional astrology, Hellenistic astrology, being of the third house, but I also associate Gemini with transportation, travel, movement, like local movement, stuff like that. So I think our communities are going to see radical changes. Our local communities are seeing radical changes as a result of the extreme escalation by the federal police force known as ICE that is acting illegally against all of the laws of this land and at the command of one person, that is destroying communities at a very rapid pace. And it's going to disrupt a lot when it comes to our neighborhoods and how we function as a community and transportation systems, transportation of food, supply chain stuff. So I can definitely see Uranus and Gemini having that kind of an impact. And also, like I said, like some, revolution, radicalization, like how can we use ideas and words? How can we change the way we talk about things? How can we change the way we share information? How can we radicalize or revolutionize our, transportation systems and how we like connect with one another on a local level? So those are my thoughts about Uranus and Gemini.
Last thing about Uranus and Gemini. So, one of the parts of the many parts of the bill that we've been talking about, this is something that my partner told me about. One of the provisions in the bill is that state governments are not, they are prohibited from regulating AI for the next 10 years. So that's going to be the entire duration of this Uranus and Gemini transit. It is going to be the wild, wild west of AI. State governments are prohibited from regulating. And I think AI is something that needs to be profoundly regulated. So I think Uranus and Gemini, what I'm paying attention to is the internet and AI and how that is going to completely be disrupted and changed over the next.
Do that. That is scary. That is
Yeah,
so scary. Opposite of the European Union, which just passed the first like comprehensive AI law, which is specifically says that it's unethical to do biometric surveillance using AI. So like, I just want to point that out for anyone who doesn't know that, like, not everyone lives like this. You know what I mean? Not everyone has this extreme of policies and laws that are just like, again, it's a death cult essentially.
Yeah. So AI, Uranus and Gemini, that's like what I really have my eyes on. So not to predict, but just to, that's what I'm going to be observing as this transit unfolds. Shall we transition to talking about our beautiful, nourishing story? I feel like we need some nourishment after the struggles, the collective struggles we've been naming, because it's important. Like, you know, in Universal Shoutouts, we name the struggles and we name the joys. But how can we ground ourselves? How can we nourish ourselves? And I think this story does a beautiful job.
I'll talk about it. I think I'm the one who watched it the most recently. I don't know if you've seen it, Erin, but Emily's seen this movie a couple times. It's called Over the Moon, and there's a way larger story that goes into it. I don't feel confident enough about the story. I've only seen it once, but it's on Netflix if you have access to Netflix and want to watch it. But the portion that we shared is particularly impactful for the Cancer archetypes. Part of it is because it's literally about the moon and a moon goddess and moon cakes, which are a nourishing food. Both, they're more nourishing in like a spiritual and traditional sense. We were talking earlier about how Taurus also has to do with food and like food systems and stuff. But for Cancer, it's like more of how food nourishes our bodies and nourishes our spirits and our emotional bodies and our connections with one another. And the kitchen is very classically the hearth it's a place where people connect and they feel a sense of belonging and connection to one another as they cook a meal together and then ingest that like physical form of love into their bodies. And mooncakes are um they're exciting, they're sweet, they come along with a festival, and like, this is, they taste good. They don't just nourish our bodies, they nourish our spirit, they nourish our emotional capacity. So I think that piece of it, the piece of like act of caregiving through food and through cooking as an ancestral act and ritual. We interviewed Vanessa Rose a couple months ago, and she was talking about how, food is, very key to people making connections with one another. So I think that's a cool connection that this story has to Cancer season.
Yeah, I just wanted to talk more about the mooncakes. So this is like a traditional food and cuisine from China. And I believe the story takes place in China. So that's kind of the cultural rootings. It's an animated film. Like Danny mentioned, there's a cultural seasonal festival. So again, bringing in the moon, mooncakes are a tradition around, it's the Mid-Autumn Festival. So almost that like waning part of the year. So we bring in that cyclical and that seasonal aspect of the moon that we've been talking about. And then the food is literally, named mooncakes. And so there's like a cultural rootedness of this food. And then it's also familial. And Cancer can be familial, which can be literal human blood family and chosen family, right? There's a lot of people in this movie. It is a family that comes together, but they're making mooncakes to nourish their community, right? And so there's this connection with neighbors and with community, and they all have this like cultural shared tradition around this festival and the mooncakes. And one of the big storylines in this movie is that Fei Fei, the main character, who is a young person, loses her mother. She passes away, and there's an immense grief that she is processing at a very young age. And her whole journey, she actually builds a rocket to travel to the moon because her mom would tell her these stories, these magical stories about this moon goddess. And in her grief, she wanted to feel closer to her mom. And so she built a rocket to the moon to see if this moon goddess was real. And it turns out she is. So that's the other aspect of the story. So there's just such a beautiful Cancerian Cancerian archetype throughout everything in this story. The grief, the relationship between mother and child, the cultural tradition around their family, literally like their role in the community is to make these moon cakes and sell them to the community. That's their family's business. That's very Cancerian. They're nourishers, right? They're community nourishers. And then there's just this lineage, this lineage of this culture and of this family, and how this food is a central component of it. I think it really just ties up Cancer season and Cancer in a nice little bow.
Cherish life and everything you love is what the mama
Yeah.
says before she dies. And then when she dies, Feifei says, mooncakes and memories of you. And I think Cancer, we've talked about this a lot about how Cancer and the moon are the, holding of memory and the passing down of memory, like the emotional memory that's passed through the body. Like, even if it's not like people who are adopted or like don't have a connection to the person who physically brought them into the world, like there's still a connection to, as I said around the kitchen, like when we're young, we're tender, we're that soft underbelly, we're very absorbent and porous, and so we're taking on emotional memory, throughout that time. So there's something too about Cancer, like passing on that emotional memory via the body, via the emotional body, and inheriting of that memory, which can be tradition and it can also be trauma. So, Cancer's connection to healing that via belonging, via love, via nourishment in that way. And Aryn, you were talking about family and chosen family before this in relationship to this and Cancer.
So I watched Paris is Burning the other day, which if you've never seen it, I highly recommend watching it. It is a documentary made in the 80s, I believe, and it's highlighting the New York City ballroom scene, which is a scene predominantly created and nourished by Black and brown queer people, a lot of trans people, a lot of gay folks. And so that was a really sacred space where they were able to celebrate, to experience community, to express themselves in a culture otherwise rejecting them. And so something that really struck me with that movie is this insistence on chosen family. A lot of these folks had experiences of getting kicked out of their home because of their gender identity or their sexuality. And it's honestly heartbreaking to see like 12, 13, 14-year-old kids like living on the street, surviving. And so ballroom and specific people within the ballroom would act as like mothers. They have house systems where there would be like a mother of the house, and it's connected to like their performance and involvement in the ball, but it's not just, it didn't end there. It was like family systems that they created out of necessity and survival. And so I think that that's so Cancerian to, you know, we don't always have to think of family as our immediate blood family. We have so many other lineages to connect to. And so I was just really struck by this narrative, which is prominent in queer culture throughout history. This idea that when others reject us, we come together and we know what that feels like to not be involved, and we want to pour ourselves into each other. And so just this idea that like, you know, queer people would take on this role of like, I am mother of the house, like I take care of these children, they don't listen to me but I take care of them and they like come to me. And so there's sort of like breaking that conventional nuclear family role, right? And extending this idea of kinship. Dani, you mentioned something really important. Not everybody has a close, intimate connection with their birth family. There's so many things in history that complicate that. And also, we are always in connection with each other. And there's other lineages that we have aside from our blood family. Like as a queer person, I feel like I'm not related to other queer people in history, but those are a part of my lineage because we have a shared history, a shared sense of identity. You could do the same for like, even thinking about lineage ancestor, or not lineage, sorry, vocational ancestors. Who are people doing similar work to you? So there's so many ways that we can relate, and queer culture expands and extends this idea of what family is, what kinship is. And also, again, there's something really profound about people who are marginalized already and already have their challenges taking on the role of a caretaker despite what they experience. To me, that is like emblematic Cancer energy, where it's like, yes, I have a heavy load and I'm going to help you carry yours too.
Anything else we want to say about the story before we offer some reflection questions? Awesome. Emily, you wrote these questions, so you should say them.
Thank you. Yes. So, as always with Astro Church, we are reflecting, which reflecting is a lunar activity. So, we invite you to reflect on these questions, think about them, meditate on them, journal about them, talk about them with someone you have a close emotional bond with. So, as the empire crumbles and chaos swirls, what practices ground you in the present moment and nourish your mind, body, and spirit? How can you come together with your community to nourish and support one another? What can we learn from past generations about nourishing one another in hard times? Who, what, or where feels like home and cultivates your sense of belonging? So, thank you for sticking with us and for listening to this Astro Church sermon. I hope it has fed your body and soul. So this has been our Cancer season Astro Church. Thank you for listening. Until next time. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Soul Connections. To support the show, please share this episode with a friend and give us a 5-star review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts.
This podcast is an act of community co-creation with artwork designed by Bree Legan and original music written, produced, and performed by Sophia Mock, Queen Bonobo, Liv LaFlove, and Danielle Renee.
To connect with us or a guest, visit the links in the show notes. Until next time.